Christmas is supposed to mean warmth, love, and family. But the last holiday I spent with mine began with laughter, the kind that doesn't make you smile, the kind that cuts you in half. My name is Evelyn Carter. I'm 72 years old, widowed, and I've lived long enough to know that people's true colors shine brightest when they think you can't fight back. My husband, Robert, passed away 10 years ago, and since then, Christmas has always felt a little emptier. Still, I clung to the idea of family, of gathering around a table, of stories and carols and children's laughter. I thought blood meant loyalty, but I was wrong. That evening, I sat quietly in the corner of my son Daniel's living room, the tree glittering with ornaments his wife picked out to match her modern aesthetic. Nothing about it felt warm or welcoming. It was cold, like the tone of the conversations swirling around me. Daniel and his wife, Melissa, were in the middle of boasting about their Christmas trip to Aspen first class, of course, because coach is for people who settle. Melissa, her wine glass tilted casually in her manicured hand, turned toward me with a smirk. "Mum, you're not traveling anywhere for Christmas, are you? I mean, you can't even afford a decent coat. A plane ticket? Forget it." Her words were followed by the kind of laughter that makes you wish you were invisible. Daniel joined in, adding fuel. She probably couldn't even afford the baggage fees. The others chuckled. Melissa's brother, her sister, even Daniel's friends who'd dropped by. No one looked at me as a person. I was the punchline of their holiday cheer. I sat there with my teacup trembling in my hand, the steam rising into my face like a curtain I could hide behind. Inside, my stomach twisted, but I forced a small smile. I had learned long ago that showing pain only gave them more to feed on. Melissa leaned closer, her voice dripping with mock concern. "Don't take it personally, it's just, you should be realistic. First class isn't something people like you ever experience. That's for people who work hard, who deserve it. People like you." The words echoed like a hammer blow. I wanted to ask her who she thought had worked to raise her husband, who had stayed up nights sewing hems and patching clothes when money was tight, who had gone without new shoes so her son could have a new pair each school year. But I didn't. Not yet. Instead, I set my cup down, folded my hands in my lap, and listened. They went on about the luxury lounges, the champagne on boarding, the kind of food they'd be served at 30,000 feet. Melissa described it all as if she were starring in a commercial for a life she thought was hers alone. Every so often, Daniel glanced at me with something between pity and smugness. I recognized that look. It was the look of someone who thought they'd outgrown their roots, who saw the woman who gave them life as nothing more than baggage. When the laughter finally shifted to another topic, I excused myself, saying I needed some air. Outside, the December night bit into my cheeks, sharp and cold. The world felt quiet, muffled under the weight of snow. I stood in the driveway, staring at the frosty cars lined up in front of their big decorated house, and for a moment, I almost broke. Almost. But then I remembered Robert, his voice, steady and kind, the way he used to tell me, "Evelyn, never let anyone write your story for you. They'll turn you into a character you don't recognize. Write it yourself, even if it takes every last ounce of strength." I pulled my coat tighter and breathed deep. They thought I was powerless, a relic, someone left behind. They laughed because they believed the joke was permanent, that I would never rise above the corner they'd placed me in. But what they didn't know was this: I wasn't as fragile as they believed. I had made choices over the years, smart ones, quiet ones. Robert and I had lived modestly, yes, but behind that, modesty was strategy, investments, property. Things I'd never bragged about because dignity doesn't shout. Dignity moves quietly, like water finding its way through stone. As I stood there under the glow of their holiday lights, humiliation burning into resolve, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. This Christmas, they would see me differently. Not because I wanted their approval. I was done craving scraps of love from people who mocked me. No, it was because they needed to learn that every sneer, every arrogant word, every cruel laugh comes with a price. I walked back inside, head high. They didn't notice me too busy taking selfies, glasses raised, pretending they were already on their luxury flight. But in that moment, I made a promise to myself. They thought I couldn't afford a ticket. Then I would buy one. Not just any ticket, a first-class seat, right beside someone who would make their smug little worlds collapse. And when the time came, when they walked past me, I wouldn't need to raise my voice. I'd just look up. And they would freeze. When I got home that night, the silence pressed in heavier than usual. I set my purse down and let Melissa's words echo in my head. First class isn't something people like you ever experience. I walked to the mantel and touched Robert's photo, his smile frozen in time. He had always believed in dignity, in patience. I remembered the night he brought home stock certificates instead of a new jacket. We're not rich, Evelyn, but we're not fools. Someday, these will matter. Back then, I thought he was being overly cautious. But as I stood in my little house, humiliated and mocked, I understood. Robert hadn't just left me memories, he'd left me options. I went to the closet, pulled out the metal box, and opened the safe. Inside were the investments and accounts we'd built quietly over the years, more than enough to live on, more than enough to remind them they had no idea who I really was. The next morning, I called Mr. Harlan, our family lawyer and Robert's old friend. His voice was steady as always. When I told him what happened at Daniel's house, he went quiet, then said, "Evelyn, it's time we move forward with the plans Robert left. Are you ready?" "I'm ready," I said, my voice firm. "Then let's book our trip, first class, Christmas morning." The words struck like a bell. Poetic justice. They would be bragging about their luxury seats while I sat among them, not alone, not invisible, but beside the very man carrying the documents that would undo their arrogance. That night, as I spread the papers across the table, I felt something shift inside me. For years, I had let them laugh. But Robert was right. Never let anyone else write your story. This Christmas, the story would be mine. And when they saw me, they wouldn't be laughing. Christmas morning dawned crisp and cold, the kind of morning where the air feels sharp in your lungs and the streets are quieter than usual, as though the whole world is holding its breath. I pulled on my wool coat, the one Melissa once called outdated, and stepped outside with my suitcase in hand. It wasn't fancy luggage, no shiny monogrammed initials or leather trim, but it was sturdy, reliable, like me. The taxi driver greeted me with a cheerful, "Merry Christmas," and for the first time in years, I felt those words land with weight. Merry Christmas. Yes, it would be. As the city slid by, twinkling with lights still glowing from the night before, I thought about all the times I had watched Christmas mornings from the sidelines. While my family scattered into their own little worlds, I stayed behind, unseen. But not this time. This time, I had a seat waiting for me in the section of the plane Melissa had sworn I'd never touch. The airport was buzzing with holiday travelers, families hugging, children in Santa hats dragging toy-filled backpacks behind them, couples holding hands as they checked their boarding passes. I wheeled my suitcase through the sliding doors and joined the stream of people headed toward security. And that's when I saw them. Daniel, tall and broad-shouldered, walking like he owned the terminal. Melissa, her coat trimmed with fur, sunglasses perched on her nose as if she were stepping onto a runway instead of an airplane. Around them, their friends and relatives clustered, talking loudly, laughing too much, their voices carrying above the hum of the crowd. I froze for a moment, my heart pounding. I hadn't expected to see them this soon. Melissa's laughter rang out as she waved her boarding pass at one of her friends. "First class, baby. Nothing but the best. Can you imagine flying coach on Christmas?" "Ugh, no thank you." Daniel smirked and wrapped an arm around her waist, kissing the top of her head. "We deserve it. We've worked hard for this." Worked hard. My jaw tightened. They had no idea the real meaning of work. I ducked my head slightly, but not out of shame, out of strategy. I didn't want the reveal to happen here. Not yet. The stage wasn't set. No, it needed to happen at the perfect moment, when their arrogance was at its peak. I checked in at the counter, the agent scanning my ticket with a polite smile. "First class, Mrs. Carter. Please enjoy your flight." The words sent a shiver down my spine. First class. Not because of the luxury, but because of the symbolism. For once, I was stepping into the space they swore I would never belong in. Security was uneventful, though Melissa and Daniel made it into a production. Melissa fussed about having to remove her shoes, rolling her eyes dramatically, complaining about the line. Daniel laughed with one of the guards, making jokes at other travelers' expense. It was exhausting just to watch them. I moved quietly, deliberately, letting their noise fade behind me. By the time we reached the gate, the lounge area was full of travelers sipping coffee, scrolling through phones, or letting children nap across their laps. Daniel's group planted themselves near the front, their voices carrying above everyone else. Melissa snapped selfies, her lips pursed into an exaggerated pout, while Daniel bragged to his in-laws about the ski resort awaiting them. I chose a seat farther back, near the window, where I could watch the planes taxiing along the snowy runway. My heart thudded steadily, not from fear, but from anticipation. And then, the announcement. "We are now boarding first-class passengers." It was like a bell ringing in a cathedral. My moment had arrived. I stood, collected my bag, and walked toward the gate. For a split second, I felt their eyes on me, but I didn't look their way. Instead, I handed my boarding pass to the attendant, who smiled and said, "Enjoy your seat in 2A. 2A. The sound of it was sweet as honey. Behind me, I heard Melissa's sharp intake of breath. "Wait, Mum? First class? Are you serious?" Her voice was loud enough to draw attention from the people in line. Heads turned. My cheeks warmed, but I didn't falter. I simply gave the attendant a polite nod and continued down the jet bridge. Melissa's laugh followed me, brittle and mocking. Oh, please. She probably begged for a charity upgrade, or they made a mistake. Daniel chuckled too, his voice dripping with disdain. "Yeah, Mum in first class? That's rich." I kept walking, my steps steady against the carpet. Inside, though, my heart raced. Not with shame this time, with triumph, because I knew something they didn't. When I stepped into the cabin, the air felt different, quieter, calmer. The seats wide and inviting, the attendants greeting me with warmth. I found my place in 2A, set my bag down, and let myself breathe. The real moment was coming. As I settled into the plush seat, I glanced at the empty spot beside me. Soon, it would be filled by someone who would silence every sneer, every cruel laugh. My lawyer, Mr. Harlan, carrying the documents that held my family's future in his hands. And when Daniel and Melissa walked past, all their arrogance tucked into designer bags and smug smiles, they would see me here, not in the shadows, not a joke, but in first class. And that would be the moment they froze. The cabin smelled faintly of leather and fresh coffee. I sank into the wide seat, the kind that seemed to embrace you, and for a moment, I let myself feel the weight of it. Not just the comfort, but the symbolism. Every inch of this seat was proof that they had been wrong. The flight attendant offered me a warm smile. "Merry Christmas, Mrs. Carter. Can I take your coat?" Her tone was polite, professional, but there was kindness in it too. I handed her the coat Melissa had once sneered at, that old rag, and watched as it was folded carefully, treated with more respect than my own family had shown me in years. I leaned back, fingers resting on the armrest, heart steady now. But the calm was short-lived. From the corner of my eye, I saw them enter the cabin. Daniel first, his gait confident, Melissa right behind him with that ever-present air of superiority, as though the world existed to admire her. Their group followed like a parade of noise, voices rising, bags bumping against the seats. Melissa's head turned, scanning the rows, and when her eyes landed on me, her lips curled into a smirk. She stopped mid-step, tugging at Daniel's sleeve. "Oh, this is Rich," she said loudly, making sure others could hear. "Look who thinks she belongs up here." Daniel chuckled, leaning around her to see. His eyebrows shot up, and then he let out a low laugh. "Mum, what are you doing in first class?" I looked at him, calm as still water, and replied simply, "Taking my seat." Melissa tilted her head, her voice coated with syrup and poison. "Your seat? Oh, honey, there must be some mistake. Did they bump you up for pity? Or maybe you begged the manager for a discount?" Her words floated through the cabin, pulling glances from the other passengers. A businessman 2 rows ahead shifted uncomfortably. A young couple paused, their eyes flicking between us. Even the flight attendant stiffened slightly, though she kept her composure. My hands itched to respond, to cut her down with the truth I carried, but I held it. Timing mattered. Instead, I folded my hands neatly in my lap and said, "You'll find your seats further back." Daniel laughed, shaking his head. "Come on, Mum. First class? You can't even afford—" He stopped himself, maybe realizing how cruel it sounded, but the damage was already done. Melissa pounced. "You can't even afford a cab most days. This is embarrassing, for all of us." The humiliation attempt stung, but I had walked into this moment prepared. I refused to let their venom penetrate. I raised my eyes, locked on Melissa's, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't flinch. "Enjoy your flight," I said, each word deliberate, like stepping stones across a river. The flight attendant cleared her throat and gestured toward the aisle. "Sir, ma'am, please continue boarding. We need to prepare for takeoff." Melissa scoffed, but she moved, tugging Daniel along with her. As they shuffled past, I could feel the heat of their indignation pressing against me. They wanted me small, ashamed, diminished. Instead, I sat taller, straighter, letting their anger wash over me like waves against a stone. As they moved into the coach section, Melissa's voice carried once again. "Unbelievable. They'll let anyone up here these days." But I noticed something. Her laugh was thinner now, forced. Daniel's face had gone tight, his eyes darting back once, as though he couldn't quite reconcile what he'd seen. The seeds of doubt had been planted. The other passengers, meanwhile, shifted their gazes toward me with something different in their eyes. Not pity, not disdain. Something closer to respect, or at least curiosity. I wasn't just an old woman in a mistaken seat anymore. I was someone who clearly belonged, no matter how loudly my family protested otherwise. I let out a slow breath. The moment had been ugly, but it was necessary. And the best part? The real reveal hadn't even happened yet. As the last of the first-class passengers settled in, I glanced at the empty seat beside me. My heart gave a small, steady thump. Soon, Mr. Harlan would arrive. He wasn't just my lawyer, He was the keeper of truths my family had no idea existed. Documents that could change everything. And when he did, when Daniel and Melissa caught sight of him greeting me like an equal, when they overheard his words about finalizing the transfer and closing the accounts, they would understand. The laughter they'd thrown at me would return to them like a mirror, showing them exactly what they had become. Arrogant, hollow, small. For now I stayed silent, hands folded, eyes on the aisle. Waiting. Because sometimes revenge isn't loud. Sometimes it's the quiet dignity of taking the seat they swore you'd never reach and letting them choke on the sight of it. The plane hummed with the soft whir of engines preparing for takeoff. Passengers shuffled bags into overhead bins, voices low and muffled compared to the noise of the gate. I sat still in 2A, my palms resting lightly on my knees, every nerve in my body tuned to the aisle. The moment I had been waiting for was approaching. Melissa and Daniel were still buzzing somewhere behind me, their voices sharp in the otherwise calm cabin. I caught Peace's complaints about legroom, about overhead space, about why the flight attendant hadn't brought them champagne yet. Even in coach, they demanded the world bend to them. I tilted my chin slightly, keeping my gaze on the aisle, waiting. And then I saw him. Mr. Harlan stepped into the cabin, tall and composed, his tailored suit crisp even on Christmas morning. His silver hair caught the overhead light, and he carried a leather briefcase in one hand, his overcoat folded neatly over the other. He didn't rush, didn't glance around nervously like so many others. He moved with the ease of someone who had long been respected, the kind of man who never needed to raise his voice to command attention. When his eyes found me, his face softened into a smile. "Evelyn," he greeted warmly. "Merry Christmas." The sound of his voice carried just enough for the rows behind me to hear. A few heads turned, curious. But it was Melissa and Daniel's reaction I felt most keenly, even without looking back. The sudden silence behind me was sharp, like a knife cutting through fabric. Mr. Harlan placed his coat in the attendant's hands, then slipped into the seat beside me. "I brought everything we'll need," he said, tapping the briefcase. "Once we land, we'll finalize the documents. By New Year's, the transfer will be complete." The words were casual, matter of fact, spoken like any business exchange. But to my family, they must have landed like thunderclaps. I turned my head slightly and caught the faintest glimpse over my shoulder. Melissa had stopped mid-step in the aisle, her hand gripping the seat in front of her as though steadying herself. Her perfectly painted lips parted, eyes wide, frozen in disbelief. Daniel stood stiffly behind her, his jaw clenched, color draining from his face. I didn't say a word. I didn't need to. The sight of me sitting comfortably in first class, next to a man like Mr. Harlan, with documents being mentioned that was enough to unravel them. Melissa leaned toward Daniel, whispering harshly, though her voice carried. "What documents? Did you hear that?" Daniel muttered something I couldn't catch, but his tone was low and strained, nothing like the booming laughter he'd used at the gate. Mr. Harlan adjusted his cufflinks, entirely unbothered by the storm brewing behind us. He leaned closer to me, his voice lowering so only I could hear. "They didn't know, did they?" I allowed myself a small smile. Not a clue. The attendant returned, offering us glasses of sparkling water with slices of lemon. "Happy holidays, ma'am, sir." Her eyes lingered on me for just a second longer, kind and approving. She had seen what happened at the gate. She understood. Melissa and Daniel finally shuffled past, their movements mechanical, their arrogance deflated. As they moved down the aisle into coach, I felt their eyes burning into the back of my head. Melissa muttered again, this time more desperate. What is she doing with him? I sipped from my glass slowly, savoring the taste, not of lemon and water, but of justice. The rest of the first-class cabin settled quickly. Passengers flipped open newspapers, adjusted blankets, and scrolled through their phones. To anyone else, I was just another traveler heading home or away for the holidays. But to Melissa and Daniel, I was no longer the woman they thought they could ridicule. I had become something else entirely, a mirror showing them their own smallness. As the plane taxied down the runway, I felt Mr. Harlan's hand brush against the briefcase. He gave me a nod. "Everything is ready, Evelyn. They'll have to face reality sooner than they expect." Behind me, the silence of my family was louder than any engine roar. They weren't laughing now. They weren't mocking. They were frozen in their seats, their minds no doubt racing, trying to connect dots they didn't even know existed. I let the quiet stretch. Sometimes silence is the sharpest blade. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Melissa lean forward in her seat, craning her neck as though she might catch another glimpse of me and my companion. Daniel tugged at her arm, trying to pull her back, but his own eyes flickered with unease. He knew. Maybe not the details, but he knew the ground beneath him had shifted. And that was the beauty of it. I hadn't raised my voice. I hadn't needed to explain. All it took was a seat, a lawyer, and a few words about documents. The rest unraveled itself. As the plane lifted into the sky, the cabin lights dimming, I closed my eyes briefly and whispered a thank you to Robert. His patience, his planning, his wisdom, all of it had led to this moment. Christmas morning, and my family had given me laughter as a weapon. They thought it would break me. Instead, it sharpened me. Now all that was left was to watch the truth land heavier than any plane could. For a while the only sound was the low hum of the engines and the clink of glasses as the attendants moved down the aisle. I sat still in my wide seat, sipping water, eyes fixed ahead, though I could feel the heat of Melissa's stare boring into the back of my head. She hadn't touched her seatbelt buckle. I could imagine her fidgeting, whispering, pulling at Daniel's sleeve until she couldn't take it anymore. It didn't take long. Half an hour into the flight, just after the seatbelt sign clicked off, I heard the shuffle of heels on the carpet. Then Melissa's voice, shrill and tight, cut through the calm of the first-class cabin. "Excuse me, what is this?" I turned my head slowly. There she was, standing in the aisle between our row and the next, one manicured hand gripping the headrest, the other planted firmly on her hip. Her face was painted in its usual perfection, but I saw the cracks now, the twitch in her jaw, the shine of panic in her eyes. "Melissa," I said evenly, "you should be in your seat." She ignored me, leaning forward so the words spilled into my space. "Who is he?" She jabbed a finger toward Mr. Harlan, her tone dripping with accusation. "What are these documents you're talking about? You're playing some kind of game." The people around us had gone quiet, every pair of eyes pretending not to listen while straining to hear every word. Even the flight attendant paused with her tray, lips pressed tight, gaze flicking between us. Mr. Harlan didn't flinch. He set down his glass, folded his hands over the briefcase, and answered smoothly, his voice carrying with the authority of a man who had been in countless courtrooms. "I'm Mrs. Carter's attorney, and the documents I mentioned concern the transfer of certain assets into her sole control." Melissa blinked, stunned for a moment, then barked a laugh far too loud. "Assets? What assets? She has nothing." The words stung, but only for a heartbeat. Then, like a spark hitting dry tinder, anger flared into pride. "Melissa," I said, my voice quiet but sharp enough to slice through her theatrics, You don't know everything about me, and perhaps that's the problem. You never cared to. Daniel appeared then, his large frame crowding the aisle behind her. His voice was low, harsh. "Mum, what's going on? Why are you doing this?" "Doing what?" I asked, raising my brows. "Sitting in my seat? Traveling with my lawyer?" He leaned closer, his face reddening. "Why didn't you tell us about any of this? If you had money, investments, whatever this is, why keep it secret?" I held his gaze, unblinking. "Because every time I gave you something, Daniel, it became fuel for your arrogance. You never said thank you. You only asked for more. And when there was nothing more to take, you mocked what I had left." His mouth opened, then closed. He looked suddenly smaller, his broad shoulders sagging. Melissa, though, was relentless. She sneered at Mr. Harlan. "So what? You're transferring her bingo winnings? Don't play games. We know she can barely keep her lights on." Mr. Harlan's eyes glittered with something like amusement. He leaned back, unhurried, and replied, "Bingo winnings? Try commercial property, multiple accounts, and shares in companies your husband could only dream of owning." The cabin erupted with whispers. Passengers shifted, some outright staring now. Melissa's painted confidence drained from her face, leaving her pale beneath the blush. Daniel swallowed hard, voice hoarse. "Is that true?" I turned toward him fully, my words steady, my tone unwavering. "Every bit of it. Your father and I built something quietly, carefully. We lived modestly, but we invested wisely. And now it's mine, not yours, not Melissa's. Mine." Melissa's eyes darted wildly, searching for something to cling to. She reached for Daniel's arm, hissing, "She's bluffing. She's just trying to embarrass us." Mr. Harlan's calm voice cut in like a gavel. "We have paperwork on board. Finalized signatures, deeds, account statements. No bluff, Mrs. Carter. By the time this plane lands, her position will be unshakable." Melissa's mouth snapped shut. Daniel stared at the briefcase as though it might burst open and swallow him whole. I leaned forward slightly, my voice soft but deliberate. "You laughed when you thought I was powerless. You mocked me on Christmas of all days. And now, you'll sit back there in coach, stewing in your arrogance, while I enjoy the very thing you said I'd never touch." For once, Melissa had no retort. Her lips parted, but no words came. She looked at me as though seeing me for the first time, not as a fragile old woman, but as someone she had underestimated, someone she couldn't control. The flight attendant stepped in then, her expression polite but firm. "Sir, ma'am, please return to your seats. We'll be serving soon." Melissa glared one last time before turning sharply, her heels clicking against the carpet as she stormed back down the aisle. Daniel followed, slower, glancing back at me with eyes that carried something I hadn't seen in years. Shame. I exhaled slowly, letting the weight of the moment settle. The whispers around us died down, the hum of the engines reclaiming the silence. Mr. Harlan gave me a small nod, approval in his eyes. "You handled that well," he said. I folded my hands in my lap, my heart steady. I didn't have to raise my voice. The truth is louder than anything they could say. And with that, I leaned back, letting the seat cradle me, the storm behind me fading into the distance. Christmas had just become a day they would never forget. The plane touched down with a gentle bump, tires screeching softly against the wet runway. Around me, passengers stirred, gathering coats and bags, murmuring about connecting flights and holiday dinners waiting on the other side. I stayed still for a moment, letting the calm sink in. Behind me, though, there was no calm. I could feel it, the restless shifting, the anxious whispers. Melissa had gone quiet after the confrontation. her sharp tongue dulled to a thin line of silence. Daniel hadn't said a word either. The arrogance that had carried them onto this flight had dissolved into something else entirely. Fear. The seatbelt sign dinged off, and passengers rose. Mr. Harlan closed his briefcase with a snap and glanced at me. "Are you ready, Evelyn?" I nodded. My hands didn't shake. Not anymore. As we stepped into the aisle, Melissa shot up from her seat in coach, her face pale but her voice urgent. "Mum, wait, please. We should talk." Daniel followed, his tone softer, almost pleading. "She's right. Let's just sit down somewhere. Work this out as a family." I stopped, turning to face them fully. The sight of them standing there, once so proud, now hollow and desperate, should have filled me with triumph. And in a way, it did. But what I felt most was clarity. "Work this out?" I repeated, my voice low but steady. "Do you remember what you said to me a week ago? But I couldn't even afford a ticket. That first class wasn't for people like me." Melissa's eyes darted, searching for a foothold. "We didn't mean it like that. We were just joking." "Joking?" I said, the word tasting bitter on my tongue. "Do you know how many times you've turned me into a joke? At dinners, in front of your friends, even in your children's ears. You laughed at my coat, my home, my life. And when you thought I had nothing left to give, you cut me down further." Daniel opened his mouth, but I didn't let him speak. My voice grew sharper, louder, drawing the eyes of passengers streaming past. "You called me a burden. You treated me like baggage. But let me tell you this. Baggage doesn't sit in first class with a lawyer carrying the deeds to everything you thought was yours." Melissa flinched as though I'd struck her. Daniel's shoulders slumped. "I am not here to negotiate," I continued. "I am not here to patch up your guilt with forgiveness you haven't earned. I am here to remind you respect is not optional. And love, real love, is not conditional on wealth or appearances. You showed me neither." For the first time, Melissa looked small, truly small. Her lips trembled, her hand clutching Daniel's sleeve like a lifeline. "Please," she whispered, voice breaking. "Don't do this. Think of the family." "Family?" I cut in. "Family doesn't laugh when you're down. Family doesn't strip you of dignity for their entertainment. You stopped being family the day you decided my worth ended with my wallet." Mr. Harlan stepped forward then, his presence quiet but firm. "The documents are signed, effective immediately. Mrs. Carter is in full control of her holdings. That includes the vacation property, the trust accounts, and the commercial shares. Nothing you say now can change that." The words hung heavy in the air. Melissa gasped. Daniel's face drained of color. Passengers brushed past them, curious glances cast at the little drama unfolding in the aisle. I turned away, pulling my coat around my shoulders as the crowd pressed toward the exit. "Merry Christmas," I said softly, not as a greeting, but as a final blow. We walked into the terminal, the crisp scent of pine and cinnamon from holiday kiosks filling the air. Families embraced, children squealed with joy, travelers hurried on to the next leg of their journeys. And me? I walked tall, my steps steady, my lawyer at my side, the weight of humiliation finally lifted from my shoulders. Outside, the world sparkled with frost. The taxi line stretched long, but I didn't mind. For the first time in years, I wasn't waiting for scraps of love or respect. I had reclaimed both from myself. As we rode away from the airport, I gazed out the window at the lights twinkling across the city. Memories of Robert drifted back, his steady hands, his quiet wisdom, his voice telling me never to let anyone else write my story. He had been right. Christmas was supposed to mean family. But sometimes family isn't the people who share your blood. Sometimes it's the people who stand beside you when everyone else tears you down. People like Robert. People like Mr. Harlan, who had been more of an ally than my own children. I smiled faintly, the kind of smile that comes not from gloating, but from knowing justice had been served. They thought I couldn't afford a ticket. They laughed at the idea of me in first class. And now, they would remember the sight of me there, calm, dignified, untouchable for the rest of their lives. And as for me, I learned something more important than revenge that day. Sometimes the best gift you can give yourself is not a seat in first class, not a stack of documents, not even the satisfaction of seeing your enemies fall. It's the simple truth that you were never as small as they wanted you to believe. And by the time they realized it, it was far too late.